Let's be real, anime is freaking weird. What's up guys, today we're going to be talking about censorship involving anime and what's actually going to happen from here. So guys, I recently just watched this YouTuber by the name of Out of Japan who basically talks the idea about Japan is being forced to censor anime and manga for the Western countries. And I thought this was a very interesting topic in itself because let's be for real, the anime community has completely exploded in Western culture over the last few years. And it's gone from a niche fandom to a mainstream with huge shows like Demon Slayer, Attack on Titan, My Hero Academia turning up everywhere, streaming platforms, conventions, even fashion. Anime's influence is so big now that the Western media is starting to borrow its style and storytelling. We're not just watching anime, it's shaping pop culture here in a big way. But with that popularity, we are seeing a lot of opinions, especially from people who are not used to some of the anime's more, I would say, unfiltered content. And that's where the whole censorship debate comes into play. As Western influence grows, is anime losing its edge, or is this just the cost of going global? Let's dive into it. So basically, it happened on October 29th when the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women has reportedly expressed concerns about Japanese media and the speculated impact it could have on gender and sex-based violence. Japanese government has been pretty slow to respond to external pressure when it comes to censorship of Japan's media, although the same cannot be said for its corporations. When I mean by corporations, I'm talking about freaking Visa and MasterCard. Oh my gosh, bro. And I'm not just talking about anime, I'm talking about mangas, webtoons. Certain shows can get freaky as hell, okay? Regular media is so heavily influenced nowadays by adult content. Don't get me wrong, the whole idea of censoring it at its source is pretty crazy in itself. That I don't believe in. But let's be honest. Anime can be weird, right? Really weird. And I'm not just talking about the occasional quirky moment. I'm talking about some serious stuff that can make you pause the video and ask yourself, did that just happen? Take for Dragon Maid as an example, right? One of the main characters is a dragon lady. Is obviously a joke that her chest is absurdly large for her size. And that's supposed to be comedic. But here's the issue. It's not just a one-time gag. There are so many jokes and awkward moments stem from her chest size. And it's played for laughs. But even after it's revealed that obviously she is 1,000 years old, but she's playing as a 16-year-old. Keep that in mind. They keep going back to the same joke involving her chest. And low-key, it gets pretty uncomfortable. They even highlight it over and over again, even after we know that she addresses herself as a 16-year-old. Do y'all know how many times we see it in anime where they have a short little character that has the size of an actual child, but say that, oh no, it's okay, they're 1,000 years old, and it's okay for them to get with this 40-year-old. You get what I'm saying, right? It's so heavily prompted in anime culture, it's crazy. And I get it, anime has exaggerated designs, but when it becomes the main focus of your character's interaction, it honestly crosses a line. Now let's talk about Dandadan. Alright, this is a very new show that's very popular. Heck, I even watch a majority of all the episodes that's been coming out lately. But right at the very first episode, we were hit with some seriously questionable content. I mean, we're talking about a teenage girl being stripped, a near-end assault scene, and then there's an elderly woman who wants to nibble on a young boy's, well, you get the idea. I'm not saying these shows should be banned. No one's saying that. But this kind of content, it's just weird. And frankly, it doesn't need to exist, especially when it involves minors in this way. But here's the bigger question. Who gets to decide what's okay? Does the US have the right to step in and censor Japanese content because it's deemed inappropriate by Western standards? Just because something's weird doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be censored. But how far is too far? And who gets to draw that line? Look, I'm all for creative freedom, okay? I do my own animations myself on my side. But it's hard to ignore how often anime crosses the lines with its treatment of sexual themes, especially when it involves underage characters. Do we really need content like that reach the masses, especially younger audience who might not be even equipped to process it? Sure, some of this content is meant for adults, but should it be accessible without any kind of filter? This is where I think we need some sort of regulation, age gates, warnings, or even restrictions. It's about protecting the audience, not shutting down creativity. I'm not saying we should ban these shows. I'm not saying that at all. But there should be some accountability for what gets shown to viewers of all ages. Kids definitely don't need to be stumbling on this kind of content. I know I didn't at 12 years old when I saw some questionable things in shows that were marketed as appropriate for younger viewers. But we also have to recognize that censoring these shows isn't as simple as slapping a warning on them. This is where things get a little tricky. If we start censoring content based on moral standards, it could eventually lead to a stifling of creative freedom. We're walking a fine line here, folks. But keep in mind too, when you use the idea of creative freedom, just remember there are going to be people that abuse that creative freedom for their own gain. Now, I know what you're thinking. Freedom of expression is a fundamental right. It's something that many creators and fans hold dear, and I get it. Anime and manga are forms of art. They express different ideas, cultures, and even dive into some pretty wild and sometimes controversial subjects. But here's where it starts to get complicated. Just because something is art, does that mean it should be free from criticism or regulation? Does that mean it should be exempt from any kind of boundaries, especially when it's being consumed by a younger audience? Let's be real, anime is wild, sometimes too wild. Now, don't get me wrong, this ain't no back in my day type of speech. I'm just saying, for what's happening nowadays, I would even argue this is in every sort of media that we see, like whether it's Instagram, actual movies, Western movies, hell, even shows. Like, kid you not, they like so many shows have been opening up with like sex scenes in like the first episode. It's not even funny anymore. Like, genuinely, like, bro, I don't want to see his butt. Come on now. And a lot of times, like, these shows and stuff, like these movies aren't even like romance based. Like, kid you not, there's like no romance at all, but for some reason there's a sex scene. It's crazy. And like, don't get me wrong, I agree with the whole idea of protect freedom of expression. Like, everyone deserves that right, don't get me wrong, but let's be honest, some things of freedom of expression they abuse. And for those of you who think that isn't true or that doesn't take place, the best example I can give you is if you go on Twitch right now and look under the art tab, and from there on you can honestly, you will get hit by every single OF model doing some form of art that's considered freedom of expression involving their bodies. But that's what I'm saying though, and mind you too, Twitch is for 13 and up. You get what I'm going with, right? I'm not saying necessarily this applies to the whole issue with censorship of anime, but I'm saying is when you put it under that umbrella of protect of freedom of expression, just know there are going to be people that abuse that ideal and use it for their own gain. That's all I'm saying. But here's the thing. This whole conversation can get tricky when corporate giants such as Visa and MasterCard start pulling their support from anime and manga platforms. These companies who have nothing to do with content creation are now deciding what can and can't be accessed. Don't get me started on these two. Okay. So guys, all right, let me play devil's advocate for a moment, because while I definitely got some issues with these companies stepping in all of a sudden, I can understand where they're coming from too. And here's where the argument gets a little nuanced. On one hand, I get why people are frustrated. Visa and MasterCard pulling out is a huge freaking deal. These companies have a lot of influence on the industry. Let's be real, they're a bit of a monopoly in the financial sector. They're not just some random players, they control the flow of money for a huge chunk of the population. So when they decide to stop supporting something, it's going to have a ripple effect, and that can seriously impact the flow of anime and manga in the West. That's something we should definitely be concerned about. But here's the other side. As investors or owners, it's also within their rights to withdraw support from anything they don't align with. Think about it. These companies have shareholders to answer to. If they feel a particular type of content goes against their values or might hurt their brand's image, they have every right to say, hey, we do not want to be associated with this. I mean, they're businesses, not charities. They're in it for profit, and if something negatively affects their bottom line, they're going to probably act on it. That's just how the system works. It is frustrating, sure, but they are allowed to choose what they want to endorse or not endorse. Just like if a company decided not to invest in something like Chick-fil-A or Netflix over political disagreements, the same principle applies here. They're using their position to arguably to push a certain image or set of values. It's not always about morality. It's about their brand and their market. That said, there's a huge difference between pulling support because of values and using that power to set cultural precedent. We're talking about a company that has the ability to dictate what gets made based on what they find acceptable. And that power is definitely something we should keep an eye on. Ultimately, I think we honestly need a balance. We need to make sure anime can still push boundaries and explore new ideas, but at the same time, we need to safeguard in places to make sure that content doesn't cross lines that could potentially harm or desensitize people, especially younger audience. But honestly, it can't be up to these big corporations to decide what's right or wrong. It's like the whole Netflix kids versus Netflix adults debate. Different levels of content for different audiences. And honestly, anime is no exception. Just because something is available doesn't mean it's okay for everyone to watch. So yeah, I think we need to find some sort of balance. Let creators create and express themselves freely, but at the same time, make sure that's what's available in the line with the age and maturity of the audience. Maybe this means more age gating, more disclaimers, or even just more transparency around the content. But because the last thing we want is for anime to be banned or over censored because of one bad incident. But we also have to be careful about letting certain content slip through the cracks unchecked. With how extreme things are getting, this raises the question, do we need some kind of boundary, whether it's big companies or even anime in itself? Ultimately, I feel like there needs to be a middle ground. And what I mean by this is I always hear the argument, how about Japan cuts complete ties with the US involving anime, manga, all of that? Guys, don't get me wrong, that sounds crazy in itself, I'll admit that. But that is so least likely to happen. It's like completely under 10%. And what I mean by that is the US is honestly one of the biggest markets for anime and manga. So if they were to completely cut ties, that would be a big hit. And with major companies playing a big role in distributing Japanese and Korean media worldwide, there's like a real need to find a balance. And I get that we need to address some of these questionable content out there, but I'm not sure how I feel about the global corporations stepping in to make that call. So here's what I think should take place. First, number one, companies need to stop inserting themselves in politics when it has nothing to do with them. Second, maybe there is some room for age gating or warnings on certain content that goes a little wild. And finally, the US and Japan needs to come to some sort of agreement where both sides can be happy. Let creators create, but maybe a little more mindful of who's watching. And to the Western powers, chill the fuck out. Like, honestly, the whole censorship demands, guys, y'all need to chill the fuck out. Like, come on now. All right, guys, that's it for the vid. Thank you all so much for joining me. And please like, comment, and subscribe. And tell me what y'all think. Do y'all think anime censorship from the West is too much? Or is this just a part of keeping content safe for everyone? Let's talk about it below. And always, please, guys, catch y'all on the flip side.